No nanny had lasted more than 3 days with the Welder twins. Not one. Ethan Wilder stood in his magnificent penthouse apartment as Seattle's misty and very persistent rain streaked down the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights, blurring behind the glass into a beautiful and very lonely abstract painting. He had just, for the 8th time in as many weeks, watched the latest highly qualified caregiver leave. Another well-credentialed and very expensive professional, formerly endorsed by one of the city's most prestigious preschools, now fleeing. With a look of a pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes, the wheels of her small, sensible suitcase screeching a final, defeated protest across the polished marble floors. The apartment, which had been so full of a tense and very adult frustration just moments before, now fell quiet again. A quiet that was immediately and very violently shattered by the triumphant shrieks of a pure, childish laughter echoing from the living room. Max and Leo, his 5-year-old twin boys, had just finished building a magnificent and very structurally unsound couch-cushion fortress, and they were screaming like the victorious and very wild conquerors of a grand and very imaginary battle. This was the story of a father who had faced down crime lords, who had exposed corrupt and very powerful officials, and who had reported with a great and very real courage from the front lines of actual war zones. But this was a battle he was losing, until she arrived. Before we dive into this incredible story of love, of loss, and of the profound and very beautiful healing of a broken family, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, My Truth Story, and share this story. Ethan loosened his expensive and now very suffocating tie inside, a long, weary sound that was completely and utterly swallowed by the vast, empty silence of his own, very beautiful and very lonely home. He had once been a decorated and very celebrated investigative journalist, but nothing, absolutely nothing, in his entire and very adventurous life had prepared him for the quiet and very brutal war of a single fatherhood in the deep and very suffocating wake of a profound and very real grief. His wife, his beautiful and very beloved Anna, a woman who had been a passionate and very talented art teacher, had died so suddenly and so cruelly from a brain aneurysm just one short and very long year ago, leaving behind a vast empty space in their lives that Ethan still, to this day, did not know how to fill. Since then, he had tried everything. The best and most expensive child therapists, a rigid and very structured daily routine, but nothing had worked. Every single solitary nanny he had hired, and he had hired the best, had ended up being driven away, outsmarted, or just completely and utterly overwhelmed by 2 small and very grieving little boys who had, in the wake of their own very profound loss, learned to test everyone and to trust no one. His phone buzzed. A text from his ever-patient and very efficient assistant, Claire Bennett. Arriving in 15 minutes, your last scheduled interview. Ethan stared out at the fog-covered and very indifferent city of Seattle, his own jaw tightening with a new and very familiar sense of a dawning and very real despair. Claire Bennett arrived at exactly on time. She was neither early nor eager. There were no sharp clicking heels on his marble floors, no sharply tailored and very expensive business suit. She was not trying to impress. She was not clutching a resume that was filled with a long and very impressive list of her own very important qualifications. She just stood there in the doorway of his vast and very empty penthouse, with a quiet and very gentle smile on her face and a pair of steady, calm, and very beautiful blue eyes. Eyes that looked as if they had weathered their own very real storms without ever losing their softness. And when they shook hands, Ethan was caught completely off guard by how real it felt. It was not limp. It was not overly or falsely firm. It was just ... human, and it was honest. She didn't bring a resume. Instead, she reached into her simple canvas bag and unfolded a single, solitary piece of paper. It was a handwritten contract, just one single page. There were no promises of a miracle, just a simple 6-month commitment. A promise of a presence. Without any expectation, a promise of a care, without any conditions, Ethan had stared at the simple and very beautiful piece of paper. And then he had stared at the quiet and very powerful woman who was not pitching herself, but was just offering a quiet and very real sincerity. Something inside of him, something that had been frozen and very hard for the past long and very lonely year had shifted, ever so slightly. Claire arrived at 6:45 the next morning, holding a thermos of coffee and a small plush puppy with floppy velvet ears. She was not too early to seem desperate, but she was early enough to show that she meant what she had said. The private elevator carried her silently to the top floor. But when the doors opened, Ethan wasn't there to greet her. Only chaos was Claire. Stepped into the apartment, gently closing the massive soundproof door behind her. She followed the noise to the kitchen, a vast and very beautiful and very sterile space, where Ethan, now disheveled, his expensive silk shirt rumpled, was crouched by a cabinet door, trying to coax his son Leo out, while his other son, Max, had just overturned a small designer chair in a frantic and very angry search for his kidnapped toy dinosaur. Claire didn't speak right away. She just walked over to the state-of-the-art and very expensive coffee machine, poured the coffee from her own simple thermos into 2 clean mugs, and handed one to him. Ethan froze, the coffee mug halfway to his mouth. Since their mom died, Claire continued, her own beautiful and very wise blue eyes full of a deep and very real empathy. Every single goodbye for them feels final. They don't know if the people they love will still be here when they return, because the last time someone they loved left, she didn't come back. Ethan didn't reply. He couldn't. But something in his eyes, something hard and very protective, shifted, tightened. Claire, seeing that she had finally, and for the very first time, broken through his own very carefully constructed walls, approached the cabinet door where Leo was still hiding. She didn't knock. She simply knelt down and spoke, her own voice a low and very beautiful and very gentle lullaby, a long and very profound silence. And then a soft, almost inaudible click. The cabinet door creaked open, and a pair of wide and very curious brown eyes peeked out, landing on the small, plush puppy with the floppy, velvet ears that was now in Claire's hands. Claire stayed seated on the floor, not moving any closer. And Max, hearing his brother's quiet and very safe emergence, paused his mid-meltdown rant and quietly, and with a new and very different kind of a curiosity crept closer, and for the very first time in the chaotic and very painful whirlwind of that morning, a quiet and very beautiful stillness settled over the room. Stillness that was just long enough and just safe enough for 2 small and very broken hearts to finally, and for the very first time, catch their breath. 3 days passed, then 4, then a full week, and Claire remained. She was a quiet, steady, and constant presence in their loud, chaotic, and very broken world. She arrived every morning before the sun had fully risen, a warm, reassuring smile on her face, and she stayed every evening until the boys were sound asleep, a quiet, gentle guardian in the long and often very lonely hours of the night. She didn't try to be their new mother. She didn't try to pretend that the vast, gaping wound that had been left in their lives could ever be so easily or so quickly replaced. Claire she simply showed up. She built magnificent Lego towers with Max, but she always let him choose how high they would go. She read long and very complicated storybooks with Leo, always pausing with an infinite and very beautiful patience whenever he needed the space to process, to understand. And when they would, in their own quiet and very hesitant ways, ask about their mom, she didn't change the subject. She didn't offer the empty, meaningless platitudes. She just told them the truth, in the gentlest of words. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, Ethan returned from the grocery store to the sound of a soft and very unfamiliar laughter coming from the kitchen. Claire was baking cookies, a dusting of flour on her sleeves, her beautiful chestnut hair falling in loose, gentle wisps around her face. In the kitchen, which had been a cold, sterile, and very silent space for so long, now smelled of warm butter and of hope. Max was sifting flour. Beside her, and Leo was carefully arranging the small balls of dough into the shape of perfect crescent moons. Claire didn't build their trust with grand and very empty gestures or with cheap and very meaningless bribes. Oh, she didn't try to win Max and Leo over with flashy new video games or with fairy tale promises of a world without any pain. Instead, she started with the simplest and most powerful thing of all. She would sit for hours beside their elaborate couch cushion fortress on the living room floor. She didn't insert herself into their games. She didn't try to make new rules. She would just, after a long and very patient while, ask softly, "What was the hero's name from yesterday's story?" And Leo, after a long and very hesitant silence, would quietly answer, "Finn?" And Claire would just nod. "Do you think Finn," she would ask, "made it in time to rescue the bear?" And just like that, she had slipped so quietly and so gently into their world. Claire didn't lead, she followed, not to fix, but to walk beside. Them, at dinner, she didn't force them to eat their vegetables. Instead, she told them a funny story about how she used to be terrified of broccoli when she was a little girl. And then she had whispered conspiratorially, "A little bit of cheese makes it so much less terrifying." Max had tried one, single bite, his own, small face scrunched in a theatrical and very dramatic show of a disgust. But he hadn't spit it out. And Leo, he had quietly, and with a new and very different kind of a look in his eyes, finished his entire portion without a single word. That night, as Ethan watched his two small sons eat a green vegetable without being coaxed, without being threatened, he had turned to Claire. A new and very profound and very real respect in his eyes. It was Max, his small face flushed, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. Not for his dad, not for someone to help, he had asked, specifically, and with a feverish and very desperate urgency for Claire. Ethan followed Max in a rush to the boy's bedroom. Leo was curled under his thick woolen blanket, his small body trembling, his forehead burning with a new and very real fever. He whimpered, his eyes barely open. Claire, who had been quietly reading in the living room, was already at his side, as if she had somehow, and with some kind of a strange maternal intuition, felt him call for her long before the words were ever spoken. She knelt beside his bed, one of her own, cool hands resting gently on his forehead, the other rubbing his small, trembling back. There were no frantic questions, no rising panic in her voice. There was just her presence. A presence that was steady, that was calm, and that was completely and utterly unwavering. Leo gave the faintest, almost imperceptible nod. A single hot tear slid down his temple and disappeared into his soft blonde hair. It was not a tear of a fear, it was a tear of a profound and very real relief. Ethan paused in the doorway, watching. He had once and not so long ago believed that no one, absolutely no one, could ever enter the quiet and very heavily guarded world his too. Small sons had so carefully built around their own very profound grief. Claire had entered it without even asking, simply by listening day by day, breath by steady breath. When the family's private on-call pediatrician had arrived, Claire had stayed by Leo's side, softly patting his back, her quiet, calming presence, doing more to soothe him than any of the doctor's expensive and very clinical medicines. And after the fever had finally, with a great shuddering sigh, begun to break, Leo had fallen into a deep and very peaceful sleep in her arms, his small hand still clutching the soft velvet ear of Toby, the plush puppy. Max, who had been watching from the doorway, his own small face a mask of a quiet and very serious concern, then turned to his father. Ethan hadn't responded. The words, so simple and so true, had echoed in the vast, empty spaces of his own, very lonely heart. A truth, not only from his son, but from himself. After the doctor had left and Leo's fever had finally, and with a great and very welcome relief, begun to ease, Claire had remained there by the bed as if she were an irreplaceable and very essential part of the boy's world. Ethan had quietly fetched an extra blanket and a pillow, placing them on the edge of the opposite bed. He didn't dare to disturb the new and very fragile peace that now filled the room. A space that was now softened by the sound of a steady, even breathing, the gentle, warm glow of a small nightlight, and a quiet and very powerful love that lingered in the air as Claire lay down, her own tired eyes never leaving the two small boys. Max had turned first, shifting closer and resting his own small head on her arm. A moment later, Leo, who was still hazy in his own feverish dreams, had also stirred, nestling his own small cheek against her chest, clutching her as if he were afraid that he might wake up once again, find her gone. She hadn't answered. She had simply held them both tighter, burying her own face in their soft and very beautiful, child-scented hair. Her own heart felt as if it might burst, not from pain, but from something so much deeper. For the very first time in her own very long and often very lonely life, she felt as if she truly and completely belonged. No conditions, no promises. She just belonged, standing in the doorway. Ethan had silently watched, as if he were witnessing a beautiful and very sacred painting he had never imagined he would get to see. And in that one, single, solitary moment, he had understood. Claire hadn't just entered his house, she had entered their hearts, without ever even knocking. It started with a photograph. On a Monday morning, as Claire was flipping the shark-shaped pancakes she had so solemnly promised to make, Ethan received a call from an old friend in the media. Seattle Pulse, an infamous and very ruthless online tabloid site, had just published an exclusive and very salacious feature. The headline read, "From Nanny to Heiress. Claire Bennett spotted living in Ethan Wilder's multi-million-dollar penthouse." The article had unearthed every single solitary detail of Claire's quiet and very private past. Her years as a simple small-town schoolteacher, her abrupt and very mysterious departure from her previous job after an unclear incident, and it had paired this twisted and very misleading narrative with a series of intrusive and very long lens, candid shots of her, Claire, shopping for fever medicine, with Ethan, Claire, watching over a sleeping Leo on the couch, a cold towel on his forehead, and a particularly damning shot of her, entering the main entrance of their building with her own resident key card. The comments, when they came, were fast, and they were brutal. A classic Nanny two-wife pipeline. She has no formal childcare training, but she is living with two very vulnerable little boys. She's so obviously and so pathetically exploiting their grief. That evening, the school called. Due to a rising and very real community concern, the principal had said, her own voice a mixture of a professional and very real sympathy and a cold and very corporate fear. Claire was now temporarily suspended from all school pickups till further notice, the principal had added. Max had asked why Claire didn't walk with them to the bus stop that afternoon. And Leo, Leo didn't ask. He just watched, silently, as his new and very fragile world began to, once again, crack apart at the seams. That night, Claire sat alone on the balcony, the cold Seattle rain tapping a sad and very lonely rhythm. Against the railing, Ethan brought her a cup of tea, but he said nothing. They just sat there in a new and very heavy silence, sharing the immense and very unwelcome weight of what was breaking. The next morning, Max asked, "Where's Claire?" Ethan clenched his fists. But before he could speak, Leo emerged from his room hugging the new plush clothes, I think she still remembers us. Ethan didn't take long to find out who was behind the article. It was Vincent Hale, the CEO of a rival media conglomerate, a man Ethan had exposed in a series of investigative reports on corruption 3 years ago. Vincent didn't need to say a word. Ethan already knew this was retaliation. That same day, Ethan called his lawyer, his public relations team, and the principal of Max and Leo's school. He was done staying silent. Claire Bennett is the only person who has brought peace to my family, Ethan said during a brief press conference in front of the old newsroom. She hasn't taken advantage of anyone. She's not pretending. She loves my children in a way no one ever has, not even me. The short speech went viral instantly. Photos of Claire baking cookies, Claire reading bedtime stories to the boys, this time, circulated with a different caption. Maybe the only thing she ever took was the children's hearts. Claire watched the clip from a small cafe in the north end of the city. She had never imagined Ethan would go public like that. Her heart clenched, grateful yet afraid. She had brought trouble into their lives. Should she really go back? The answer came in 2 messages. The first was from Ethan. If you still think you're an outsider, just look at everything you've done for us. The second was a voice recording. Max's voice trembling. Claire, if you can hear this, please come home. Leo won't talk. And Toby misses you. Claire burst into tears right there in the cafe. No logic could hold back her heart now. That evening, after a soft knock, Ethan opened the door. Claire stood there soaked in rain, eyes swollen but shining brighter than ever. The apartment seemed to exhale. The air felt lighter, the kitchen lights a little warmer. Ethan stepped closer, standing beside her, saying nothing more. That night, once Max and Leo had fallen asleep, Claire sat in the living room, cradling Toby, her eyes quietly scanning the space around her. Ethan poured some tea and sat beside her, and for the first time, neither of them felt like they didn't belong. 6 months later, no one called Claire the nanny anymore. It's not because she'd stopped doing what she did, but because the title no longer fit what they had become. She was the one who took Max to his first parent-teacher meeting without tears. The one Leo showed his first lost tooth to. The good news arrived on a quiet morning in a small hospital room bathed in soft white light. Ethan sat beside Claire, hand in hand, his breath slightly tense. She lay there, eyes fixed on the ultrasound screen where a tiny heartbeat pulsed steadily. Like a gentle knock on a sacred door, Ethan exhaled, not in shock, but as if the entire world had been holding its breath with him. Claire turned to look at him. His face wasn't lit up as she'd expected. It was calm, moved, and filled with something deeper. That evening, while Claire was reading a bedtime story to Max and Leo, the boys climbed onto her bed, as had become their habit ever since they learned about their baby sister. Max laid his head on Claire's belly, resting his cheek on the round, soft pillow, and whispered, "Can you hear me, baby sis? Do you like shark stories?" Leo said nothing. He just placed his tiny hand on her stomach. After a few seconds, he smiled gently and turned to Claire. Claire smiled, brushing Leo's hair. Then Max said very softly, as if his words could shatter something fragile, "Mommy." She froze. Her heart was pierced by something warm, not burning, but tender, overflowing. Leo echoed, "Good night, Mommy." No one had told them to say it. No one had rehearsed it, but it came naturally like love. And Claire understood she didn't need adoption papers. She was already their mother in the purest way. In the days that followed, Ethan grew quieter than usual. He watched Claire with the gaze of a man carrying a beautiful secret. He often scribbled in a notebook, checked his calendar, and whispered with Max and Leo in the kitchen. Claire began to suspect something was going on behind her back, but she never guessed it was a proposal. Plan crafted by a father and his 2 sons. Max drew the strategy map, called it Operation Ask Mommy to Stay Forever. Leo handled the heart-shaped cookies. 1 week later, Claire returned home from a prenatal checkup, her belly now showing under a thin sweater. Apartment was dark, unusually quiet. She assumed Ethan and the boys were asleep. But when she turned on the kitchen light, the room lit up with soft, golden string lights. On the dining table sat a card written in wobbly but determined handwriting. "Mommy, will you stay forever?" Claire covered her mouth. She turned and saw Leo holding Toby, Max clutching a small ring box with a face that was both trembling and proud, and Ethan kneeling on one knee, eyes full of tender sincerity. Claire burst into tears, nodding faster than she could speak. They held their wedding a month later in the small garden behind their home where Max and Leo once played pillow fights. Now, it became the place for the most peaceful moment of their lives. Claire wore a simple white dress, her hair loose. Leo scattered paper petals he'd cut out all week. Max served as the ring bearer, this time for real, and he didn't drop them. There were no distant guests, just a few close friends, and the eyes of two boys watching their mother, who was now truly theirs. No signature required. When the pastor bent down and asked, "Max and Leo, do you agree to let Claire become your mom?" Max shouted, "Yes, sir." Leo gripped Claire's hand tightly. "I think baby sister agrees too." Laughter broke through tears. That night, the whole family sat together under paper lanterns. Claire placed a hand on her belly where a tiny heart was growing, wrapped in love. Ethan gently laid his hand over hers. 4 souls. Now one family. Sonny was born on a quiet spring morning under a sky that felt unusually gentle for Seattle. The rain from the night before still clung to the hospital windows in sparkling droplets. Claire was breathless, forehead damp with sweat. But her eyes never left the tiny figure, letting out her first cry in her arms. Ethan sat beside her, gripping her hand. But his heart had burst open the moment the doctor said, "A healthy baby girl. Both mother and child are doing perfectly." Claire gazed down at the little being wriggling gently, her tiny fists curled as if trying to hold on to her first taste of light. The moment felt still, as if the world paused to witness a beginning, and something inside him softened utterly, completely. 2 days later, Max and Leo were brought into the hospital room. They froze at the doorway. "She's so small," Max whispered. "Smaller than Toby?" Leo asked. Claire laughed gently and placed Sonny into Max's arms, sat upright, hands trembling, but pride shining in his eyes. Leo stepped forward carefully, laying a tiny cloth over his baby sister. Claire and Ethan exchanged a glance. No words, just a shared understanding born from loss, from healing, from love. A few quiet weeks passed, filled with lullabies, late-night feedings, and sleepy smiles. Then one golden afternoon, the whole family gathered in the backyard, the very place where they'd once promised forever. The sky was open, sunlight threading through leaves, turning Sonny's hair to golden silk. Claire sat on the bench, cradling Sonny in her arms. The baby slept peacefully, her little fingers gripping her. Mother's shirt like the wind might carry her away. Ethan sat beside them, arm wrapped gently around Claire. Max and Leo ran circles through the yard, tossing the paper planes they'd made together that morning. They said nothing more. They didn't need to, for in that single afternoon, wrapped in sun, wind, and laughter, it was clear their story wasn't about what they had lost, but everything they had found. And the world finally felt whole again. Not everyone who walks into your life stays, but sometimes the ones who come later are the F's, ones who never leave. Claire didn't arrive to replace anyone. She came to love in her own quiet, steady, and wholehearted way. She made no grand promises, but she gave everything. She didn't try to impress. She simply showed up, not with miracles, but with moments, with presence, with patience, with care. To Max, Leo, Ethan, and baby Sonny, Claire wasn't just the nanny. She became home. She became their calm, their light, their family. Because sometimes a stranger becomes the one who redefines what home truly means. Love doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be real. And family isn't always about blood. It's about who stays, who listens, who chooses not to walk away. The story of Claire and the Wilder family isn't a fairy tale. It's real, but it's the kind of real we all hope for. It's the kind where someone one day simply chooses to stay. If this story warmed your heart even just a little, please like, share, and help someone else feel a little less alone today. And if you'd like more heartwarming, soul-deep stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. There's more where this came from.